You bet.
We want to talk more about this with Lauren-Brooke Eisen. She's a senior fellow at New York University Law School's Brennan Center for Justice program, and she focuses on improving the criminal justice process. She's also the author of Inside Private Prisons, An American Dilemma in the Age of Mass Incarceration. So, Lauren-Brooke, I want to first simply start with kind of an outline of how far we've come on this question of prison reform. I mean, the conversation that we are having now around this issue that both Republicans and Democrats are participating in, very, very different from the conversation that we were having in the 1990s when the frame was completely different. How have things changed in your view?
Absolutely. So in 2008, we have 2.2 million people behind bars in this country, more than any other country on the planet. And a lot of your viewers probably know that the U.S. has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's incarcerated population. But with mass incarceration, we have not improved communities. We have not made communities safer. We have not reduced recidivism. And that's why the First Step Act is trying to move us in the right direction. And as you mentioned a few minutes ago, there are some pieces of this legislation that would help those who are behind bars, such as eliminating the shackling of pregnant women in federal prison and providing free menstrual products to women behind bars in federal prison. But the real issue with this bill is not what's in this bill, but what's missing from that bill, and that is meaningful sentencing reform. And the First Step Act is trying to reduce recidivism, but we know the real way to reduce recidivism is to eliminate mass incarceration. And that's why the Brennan Center, along with 100 civil rights organizations, are pressing for meaningful sentencing reform instead of pressing for this First Step Act.
Do you think that if in fact there were not, if the bill ultimately that's going to move forward here does not include those mandatory minimums, do you think that the overall cause of prison reform would be better served by passing nothing right now and holding out that full package? Or do you think this may be the best that's kind of on the table right now in this climate?
Well, that's the real heart of what's happening right now on Capitol Hill. But this bill has absolutely no sentencing reform. And there is a bill that Republican Senator Chuck Grassley has introduced called the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act. Now, that bill would reduce mandatory minimums specifically for nonviolent drug offenses. And that's really significant because if we want to reduce mass incarceration, we need to chip away at the mandatory minimums that produce unjust, long, unnecessary sentences that ultimately result in mass incarceration. And the Brennan Center has recently issued a report noting that almost 40% of those who are in state and federal prison do not need to be there and could be released today. Now, the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act would result in the release or early reduction for about 7,000 people in federal prison. That's pretty significant. And on top of that, about 2,500 people would be released earlier than they would be today on an annual basis. If we want to chip away at mass incarceration, we've really got to focus on eliminating mandatory minimums. And the Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act also gives judges discretion to sentence more proportionate to the crime that has been committed. And all of that is missing from the First Step Act.
Lauren-Brooke Eisen, thanks so much for your perspective.